Right here, we set the animation wrap mode equal to loop. And what that is the wrap mode can either do clamp forever, which plays back the animation, and when it hits the end, it doesn't play again, it doesn't loop. And default is actually once. It's the same thing as once. Once just reaches the end of the animation and then stops playing. Ping pong will reach the end of the animation and then go back to the beginning. Loop will just, it'll loop it, it'll just keep on continuing playing it. So we want it to be loop. But the only animation that we don't want to loop is actually idle tap. So we make that not loopable by doing animation, open bracket, then we state the animation, then we call it once. Set the wrap mode to once. The next thing I'm gonna copy and paste in is the update function, and this is a big portion of the script. You can delete the function update, or you can just copy the inside of it from here down. I'm just going to copy the whole thing. Paste it. And actually, I copied the idle animation too. That's okay. Here. So the only function we didn't copy was the do action. So let's just copy that. Put it at the bottom. Now we can get rid of this text file. Okay. So let's start at the top. What update function does is it calls every time a frame is updated. So I think Unity can go up to like 200 frames per second. I don't know the exact number, but if we can go up to 200 frames per second, that means the function update is going to be called 200 times a second. So in the function update, we have a bunch of if statements. We have if we're not pressing get input button down, action. And that doesn't even make sense because that's not even a button. We would normally see something like a mouse 1 or the letter K. But how that works is we gotta go up to edit in Unity, project settings, input. Nothing's gonna show up because the axis isn't brought down yet. So there we go. Right now we have a bunch of buttons. These are all buttons. We got horizontal and vertical, which are axis. We got a bunch of fires and jump. We're going to be using jump and these two. But we want to create our own button called action. So you just up the size to +1 of what it was, and add it to the bottom of the list, and then you can rename it in the name slot. And now we gotta do the positive button. We don't want the joystick button 3, so let's delete that. The button we want is left CTRL. Okay. Now our action is set up. This is actually the same thing as typing input dot get key down left CTRL. That's the same thing as typing get button down action. But I like the get button down action because we can later change our buttons to whatever we like without having to go back into code. So let's keep it back at action. And if we're not pressing the action button, that's going to mean we can animate. And that doesn't really make sense right now, but it'll make sense as we go along. T. I told you I'd explain it later, so let me explain it. What T is the animation and the animation selected. So by default 0 goes here when we first start up. That means the action selected is punch. So T is going to equal the punch dot clip dot length, and that's just going to be 78 frames long, if I remember correctly. Then it's going to put the 78 frames long, then convert it to time, and then we add the current time. We're going to use T to, when we do press the action button and we go down to the do action, it's then going to wait until time is greater than T. So that means when our animation is playing, we can't press action button again to play the animation until the animation is all the way done. Then we can play it again. Okay? The next if statement is switch. So we need to go back into the inputs and set up that input. So go edit, project settings, input, make it 19. I'm going to call it input, not input. I'm going to call it switch. We don't want it left control, we actually want it left alt. So when we press left alt, it's going to add 1 to our index action, therefore making it shooting one hand. It's going to make it that animation. And what this part is, it makes it so it cycles through the array. So actions.length is the length of the array, which is 4. So when index action is equal to 4 and it adds 1 again, it's going to make it 0. So that's how it cycles through. Then updates the status GUI text to the new index action we have. I'm going to press Control S to save it, and I'm going to test it out. If I press the Alt button, there we go. It changes to the next element because the index action is now 1. If I press it again, there we go. Now it's 2. shooting 2 hands. Looks like I have a mistake right here, so add a G right there. Okay. And then if I would have pressed it again, it would have gone to spell. Press it again, it'd go back to punch. Now, a lot of our if statements are going to be in this if statement, because we don't want to be moving if we're in the air. So we have to check if our robot controller is grounded, which just means we're colliding with the ground. So if the robot controller is grounded returns true, then we can check this if statement. Now the input.getAxis part is the same thing as getButton, except it just refers to these as axes, which is really nice. The axes actually give off number values. So what we're going to do is we're going to check if we're pressing the vertical axis and it's greater than 0.2. Also, we're also going to be checking if we're not pressing the left control. So if I hold down left control when we're in the game and I press up, then this isn't going to return true because I'm actually holding this down. And I don't like get key, I'm going to change it to get button action because we set that up. Oh, and you might have noticed that there's a get button and then there's a get button down. The get button is going to be called every second that you're holding down the action button. So if we're doing 200 frames per second in our game, it's going to be called 200 times in a second. However, the get button down is only called once because you press it down once. And then there's also a get button up for when you release the button. So if we're pressing up and we're not pressing the action button, we're going to make the walk animation .speed equal 1. The speed does not have to do with this speed number up here. So I'm just going to make sure that these aren't the same. What .speed is actually the direction that we're going to play our animation. So if we want to walk backwards, we want to play the animation in reverse speed. Or, if you really want to, you could set up a reverse walk animation, and we don't even have to include this. So, once we get there, I'll show how it works.